Today is Thursday, October 31st, 2013, and this is the start of an interview at the Hopkinton Senior Center with David Hughes. I'm Nancy Clark, interviewer for the Oral History Project. Dave was born in Hopkinton in 1945 and lived here for 6+ decades. He was a teacher and coach in the Hopkinton Public Schools. After retiring, he and his wife moved from their East Street home to Northbridge, but of course they still have very strong ties to Hopkinton. And both Dave and I stayed up very late last night watching the Red Sox, so hopefully we appear to be very awake. Go Red Sox, World Series champions. Okay, Dave, I wondered if you could start by talking about your family's earliest history in town. I know you said that your parents moved here at some point.
Sure. The earliest, my grandparents never lived in Hopkinton. We had no ties until October 3rd, 1942. And that's when my father and mother purchased 192 Hayden Row Street. And I have an advertisement here that we can get a picture of later, but it was advertised as located on a state road between Milford and Hopkinton in this spacious 8-room home. Has all the modern improvements. We had a 2-seater in the back, an outhouse that was located in the shed, so that was a modern improvement back in the 40s and the 50s. Has a veranda, recreation hall, which was upstairs, and a storage shed. 32 acres of land with woodland and 6 acres of apple trees. Beautifully furnished apple house for storing fruit. Definitely a desirable business setting and a good income. Reasonable offers will be accepted. It was 32 acres, but for whatever reason, and I don't know the reason, we only purchased 20 acres for $4,000. Back in 1942. I have a plot plan of it, which Nancy will take a picture of later, and I'll quickly show it to you here. And it shows you all the boundaries and who lived on the west, who lived on the east, who lived on the north, and of course Tom Brown on the south. Tom Brown being a big entity in Hopkinton. All the Brown family was the Brown Gym, named after Walter Brown, etc. So we purchased it from a people named Kyes, K-Y-E-S, and if you look it up in the deeds in Cambridge, sometimes it comes up as Keys, because the K was in cursor, and when they finished the K, it looped up and it looked like K-E, but it was really the end of the K, so it was K-Y-E-S, but it looked like K-E-Y-E-S, so you look it up, it sometimes becomes Keys. And the 2 kids we bought it from, had been left to by their mother and father, and they didn't want anything to do with it. One lived in Concord, Mass., one lived in Washington, D.C., and so they just wanted to get rid of it, which happens a lot. Anyway, they had purchased it from Draper. Draper is huge in this area, especially in Hopedale, in their textile industry, one of the biggest in the world. And Draper, for whatever reason, he bought a lot of land all the way everywhere from Hopkinton to Milford to Hopedale. And so the Kyes bought it from them, and we eventually bought it from the Kaises in 1942. And from there, my mother and father, we used to live in Watertown, which is big because I was born in Waltham, in the Teresian Hospital right off of Route 20. It's no longer there, but as you come out of Watertown, it was right on the right-hand side going into Waltham. The first 4 or 5 kids were born there, and then after that it was Framingham Union with Doc Joe.
That would be Joe Annunziata.
Dr. Joseph Annunziata, Doc Joe. I don't think anybody called him Joseph Annunziata, but he was a fantastic person, another icon like Tom Brown and Walter Brown in Hopkinton. But we bought a fruit farm, 6 acres of farming, in which we eventually turned into vegetable farms, because the fruit was no longer bearing enough fruit, or either that or my father didn't know how to take care of the fruit, because he was a mechanic. And he worked for Johnson Bus Line down in Milford. In fact, if you get down 85, take a right on, whatever that, 16 is it? And then it's right there, it's a Midas oil change shop. In fact, I was in there the other day having my oil changed, and I was looking at the bays where my father used to work. It's amazing the connection that still is around here. And while I'm on Johnson Bus Line, the Johnson Bus Line used to come up through Hopkinton 3 times a day. And if you wanted to ride from 192 Hayden Row uptown, it would cost you a nickel. But then the B&M railroad, not the railroad, B&M line, bus line ran from Hopkinton to Framingham, and that was 20 cents. So it was very interesting. But the fact that they came three times a day in a farm community, I don't know how they made much of a profit. But anyway, my father worked there as a mechanic, which was awesome, and we supplemented the income raising fruits and vegetables to pay the taxes. And I have a couple of spiral-bound things that my sister would keep. This is 1951, August 31st, and a half a dozen corn was 25 cents. 3 pounds of peaches, 50 cents, apple, dozen corn, 50 cents. I'm trying to find the 2 quarts of blueberries, 80 cents. I want to find the tomatoes here. Tomatoes were like a nickel a pound. I was in the store yesterday, and because I knew I was going to do this, tomatoes will run right now anywhere from $2, depending on what kind of tomatoes you buy, all the way to $4 a pound from a nickel back in 1951. So it's amazing. But we had a farm stand out front, and obviously we sold the fruit of the land. But not only did we do that, the Dumases down the street, they had a farm stand no more than 300 yards. And then up the hollow, coming up towards the school, just before the school, where the real beginning of the Charles River is, the Mazzarellis also had a farm stand. So there was kind of competition there, but it seems like everybody had made plenty of money, so it all worked, because Hopkinton back then was truly a farm country. It's developed from a farm country into I would have to say, a bedroom community for all the places around here, but the town is really developed into a great town.
I was going to say your documents are great. If you have anything else that you want to say about them or your parents, and then if not, feel free to move on to your youth.
Well, I have in this book here all the deeds from the Cambridge, of all the Kaisers owning the place to the Hugheses owning the place, and I'm going to give this to the Hopkinton Historical Society if they want it.
Yeah, they will love
And then
it.
we have when we bought the railroad from Margaret Riggs, but I don't know how Margaret Riggs got it. Maybe she was just a representative of it was the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad train that used to run out of Milford, and we used to call it the grain store. It's now Hopkinton Lumber, and now it is becoming a bike path, which is going to be awesome for the whole town to have that thing running right through there. And I can remember as a kid putting glass on the railroad tie, the iron part of it, and have the train run over it and come back and look at it, and there was dust. It was just plain dust. I also can remember the cows. We used to have cows, of course, being on a farm. I think it was just 2 though. And the engineer would have to stop every once in a while, knock on the door, and ask us to remove the cows because they were in the way of the train. And it's funny how the cows would get used to the train and not be afraid of it and run away. But we'd have to go out and shoo them off. And of course, all the trains had a cow catcher, they called it, on the front. If you remember that, it's a little grate that, I don't know if they ever bumped any cows, but they didn't bump any of ours. But that was kind of interesting. And while I'm on the subject of cows, I can remember as a teenager when I used to work at Cushing Hospital down in Framingham. We'd work from 7 to 3:30, and we would get out and try to beat Bud Rafferty on 135, just because he would have his cows cross for about 20 minutes because they were coming in to be milked. And so that location is just before Clinton Street. It's the Legacy Farm's like second entrance, which is not developed quite right now, but it used to be a barn there, and Bud Rafter used to drive his cows across there, and everybody would stop, and not everybody, there weren't that many cars back then. But that was kind of interesting, again, we were all, farm country, cow country, whatever it was. So that was very interesting. But in our neighborhood, the Browns had a big farm, and they had a big barn. We had a big barn, chestnut and oak. The Rembys had 10 kids.
And your family had 10.
We had 10 kids. The Dumases across the street from the Rembys had 9 kids. There was never any shortage for a baseball game. We had plenty of kids to play with, but we all worked in the morning on the farm, and then if the work was done, we were allowed to go play in the afternoon, and we'd all have a game at night, just at dusk, and it was a lot of fun. It really was. It was bucking up teams and, going this way with the bat and trying to top everybody off, and I don't know, some of us will remember that, but others will not, how to buck up, so to speak. I do want to speak to Cornell's. Eddie Cornell bought Cornell's from Charlie DeLeo. Charlie DeLeo used to live up on Grove Street. Charlie DeLeo bought it from the Riggers, R-I-G-A-S. It used to be, originally Cornell's was Riggers. And across the street from the Riggers was the Riggers ice cream parlor, which she ran out of her house. The only source of water for Mrs. Rigger was a hand pump in the outhouse, and typical back in the 50s. But I just want to make that clear that it was Cornell's to Club Leo to R-I-G-A, Riggers. And Riggers sold it to Club Leo, to Charlie DeLeo, and then they moved down to Ashland right on 135. They had a small house built with the money. Right on the left as you go down past TJ's. So with that, it was interesting.
So you remember Cornell's? Was it Cornell's?
Oh, I do, yeah. That's how I remember it being Club Leo. I don't remember it too much as Riggers, but my sister and Jeannie Dumas reminded me that it was Riggers. But back to the farms, we used to have a Grange, and the Grange is now the present Historical Society. And the Grange is obviously associated, I shouldn't say obviously because nobody knows that, but it's associated with farms, and Hopkinton being all farms, we used to have Grange fairs. And I brought along some, because we used to participate in it, we used to bring out vegetables, my mother used to bake her pies, and I brought some ribbons from there, and I know Bobby Colella was a participant, and Bobby's got a lot of ribbons also. Butternut squash third, ooh, shame on us. Summer squash first, and then the straight 8 cucumbers. Those are the bigger cucumbers versus the pickling cucumbers, first place prize. And I remember picking the peppers one day, and my father said, "No, you can't pick those. You got to get the 4 lobes on the bottom. That's the ones they want." And I think with that was a first prize also. But that was pretty interesting. I did the cows, Bud Rafferty. I want to go to the 53 fire. I know that Judy Gooding,
Yeah.
they used to live right across the street from us. In 1953, May 10th, 1953, it was at night, our barn caught fire. Now they said after a while it was an electrical problem, but you don't know who might have lived in there or slept in there, some vagrant, they might have lit it on fire. But they claimed it was electrical, so we'll leave it at that. And it was late at night, and Gladys Farnsworth, who abutted our land up where Bobby Colella owns now, and they used to grow a lot of flowers, and their strawberries were fantastic. But she was coming home from bingo, and she alerted us to the fire. She saw the blaze in the sky, and she kept coming down Hayden Road, because she lived like 4 or 5 houses up, 6, 7 houses up, just after Teresa Road. And she got us awake. we all ran across, I don't know why we ran across the street, but we all went over to the Snyers house, which is we stayed there until the house was repaired. We lost the barn totally. The fire department was coming down, and for whatever reason, the truck couldn't make the hill on Hayden Road, just at the hump there by Chamberlain. It got stuck, and then they couldn't get water out of one of the pumps, but whatever. But that stuff happens, but we all survived, and the horse did not make it. Babe did not make it, which was a real shame. But with that came the '53 tractor. It's a Ferguson. The nickname is Fergie. And I got a picture here of the Fergie with my father on board, my brother Tommy and Al out front, and myself and the girls in the background, and my brother Barney there. And this was taken past Cornell's on the opposite side of the street where those new homes just were put in. Those were fields back there, and we used to grow nothing but acorn and button-up squash down there. And then directly across the street from 192, there are houses now also, but that was farm area, and we used to farm that also. So we farmed the 6 acres of that we had there. That we had 20, but there was a lot of wetland. 6 acres there, but there must have been, at least another 6 acres in total of farming. So that was fun though. But the fire, that was interesting because a year to the date prior to that, May 10th, 1952, Tom Brown's barn burned down, which is very strange. And you're like, well, it can happen. You get those quirks. And of course, with that, no longer did he have cows. He had to sell off his cows, and so his farm went kaput. Ours, we had vegetables, so it didn't matter. We only had the one cow. She went too, and the horse. But we were able to continue farming, and my father was able to continue working over there at Johnson Bus Line. So that worked out for us. And right next to us, 194 Hayden Row Street, was the old engine hall. I don't know if you remember that, but it was a big building, and it used to house fire trucks. I never saw a fire truck in there. My sisters and brothers never saw a fire, so it was a fire engine hall. Must have been the early part of the century, because when Tom Brown then eventually bought it, or however he got it, or he owned it originally. And it used to, I think the Kiwanis Club used to come down every once in a while and meet there. They used to have meeting, the chairs were lined up, and that was all it was ever used for in my lifetime. But it was a very interesting building with the pillars out front and the big double doors for the trucks to come flying out. That obviously was torn down. Now there's another house there, and I remember Tom Brown trying to sell it to the church, the Catholic Church, and they didn't want it because it wasn't worth anything, and it was just a liability for them. And then back in the day, Mary Dumas and Gertie Remby, people wanted to have the Catholic Church have a service there, and they were adamant about it. They were not going to have a church, not a church, but a service. They wanted to go uptown to have church. So they just probably wanted to get out of the neighborhood for whatever reason. But the women did have some influence back then, And speaking of the women, I remember, I don't know why I was selected to pay the taxes, but my father would drag me in his truck. We'd go up to Bob Nealon, and I'd count, or I'd hand him the ones, and he'd count the ones, because we didn't have a banks down there, so we just had ones, so we kept the ones and whatever we had. And then there was Eleanor Creedon. She was a tax collector also, and she lived on the corner of Fenton and Ash Street. And I'd have to go in there, and she'd count the ones and stuff like that so I don't know, was that once a year? It seemed like it was once a year. I don't think we paid them like we have to pay them tomorrow.
Quarterly, yeah.
Quarterly. So those are all interesting little things to me. Now, there was also a post office down on Hayden Row Street. It was a brick building and with a wooden frame. I think somehow there was wood in there. And it was never used again in my lifetime. But I remember my father, myself, and my brother Barney going down there and tearing it down, because we had a wood furnace. And even after the fire, we still had we'd throw in 4-foot logs, and that was how we would heat the house. And we would take that wood and we brought it back up and we burnt it in the furnace. So that was the post office was exactly across from Remby's, which was the end of the concrete sidewalk, and then there's a tar sidewalk that continues along right across the street, in between the Stones house, and I'm not sure who lived in the house, but then there was the Dumas's house. But this house was making illegal booze. They had a still in the cellar. And the FBI shut them down. This is again back in the 40s, late 40s, early 50s. So that again, something interesting.
And just to help people visualize exactly where you're talking about, you mentioned this area was called Squash End. And it's sort of where Hayden Row and College Street meet, that area, and up further like by Cornell's, and that's the whole area
Well,
we're talking
further
about.
down, yeah, from College Street down to the end of the Milford line was Squash End.
Okay.
Now, I really don't know why. I'm assuming they grew great
The farm,
squash.
yeah.
You know,
farms.
but whatever, you know. And but certain towns, certain areas of Hopkinton did have. There was the lane going down Cedar Street. Then there was the Four Corners where the Spoon is. That was
Okay.
considered Four Corners.
So you had your little neighborhoods.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And then if you to go along with that, when we played sports, we would play in our early years. We would play neighborhood against neighborhood. Like the Hayden Row Street gang would get down and play the Squash End gang with the Delettis and stuff, and we'd go down there. We thought we were pretty hot stuff, and they'd beat us. But the worst beating we ever got was when we played baseball against I call it the Fenton Street gang. You know, Peter and Tommy Grass, Harry Hamilton. We'd go up there and they had a little field and they killed us. And I thought we were pretty good ball players, but I guess we weren't. But it was fun. Those guys were pretty good. I have Dr. Joe here again, and he was our family doctor. And anytime there was anything wrong, he would come down. And he delivered all the after me, the twins, and Franny. That was Lydia and Mike, and then Franny and Paula were delivered down there at Framingham Union Hospital. And I don't know why I had to go to all the way to Waltham to be born. I don't know. It was pretty good. But Doc Joe was at every football game on the sideline. He was, like I said, he's definitely an icon in this town. He was great. Then I eventually got into Little League, and that was due to my mother. Of course, my father didn't want anything to do with it because he wanted us strictly working on the farm. But Little League was at night in the late afternoons, and so she did. She went over, and two of the greatest people I have ever met, ever, was George Fargo, who lived on Cross Street, and Paul Phipps Insurance, both no longer with us, God bless their souls. But Paul Phipps and George were two of the greatest people, two of the greatest coaches. I think Paul Phipps was very much involved in the beginning of the Little League. In the first part, the Little League games were at the end of the old high school, not the old high school, the now present middle school. They'd have a makeshift field with a fence right at the end of those trees, and those trees were planted by the class of '63 back in 1963. I think the student council was in charge of that with Marion Harris, and Aubrey Doyle was always involved with everything. Those are two other great people in this town. And back then, in Little League, we only had 4 teams. I think it was the Tigers, the Red Sox, the Giants. There was one other one, but we won. Of course, we had Billy Carey, so that helped. Let's see, the Johnson bus line, and the mailman. Mailman used to come twice a day.
Oh.
Guy named, his last name was Norton. He would come around 7:30 to 8 o'clock in the morning, and then back about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And if you wanted to mail a letter and didn't have a stamp, you could leave 3 cents in the mailbox, put up the flag. Of course, you'd take the 3 cents and put the stamp on, and off it went. So that was interesting back then too.
Service.
Another thing I remember is again, go back to Tom Brown and George Brown being involved with the Celtics, he would have Bill Russell and Sanders, he would have them out to dinner every once in a while. We saw these tall guys coming out of that car, and we didn't know that. I didn't know who the Celtics were, and somebody, of course, had to tell me. And so those guys were in Hopkinton at one point in their lives, which was, again, very, very interesting. Tom Brown was the postmaster in Hopkinton for years. And that was when the post office was where the Exxon station is right now.
All right.
And they had a shoe store in there, and they had a dress shop in there. It's just a little strip mall type thing.
Wow.
And of course, the town barn was where Colellis was. I'm sure you had that mentioned by somebody else. So.
And the town barn was like the DPW today?
Yeah, the DPW, absolutely. And let's see.
I just, one question too about George Brown and his affiliation with the Red Sox. Exactly what did he do?
What did he do? For work, you mean?
Yeah, and how did he? All right, how did he?
I really don't know, other than he owned the Celtics.
All right, so he owned the Celtics. It was the Celtics.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Oh yeah, very
so
much
he was the
involved
owner.
with that. Yeah,
All
he
right.
probably had business ventures and stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah, Red Sox on the brain right now, but I knew it was the Celtics.
One of the last things that I thought was very unique to Hopkins is we had religion classes during school on Friday.
Okay. In the public school.
In the public school, we would, I don't know what time of day it was, I think it was 10 o'clock in the morning, something like that. And the Protestants would head down to the Korean church, and the Catholics, of course, would take a left and head to the Catholic church. And the teachers, after they got us down there, would head to Brown and Smith's to have a cup of coffee.
Okay.
And so they'd pick us up when the religious class was over, and they'd bring us back up, and off we went back to school. I thought that went on for years.
Yeah, I would assume that was probably common in a lot of places
Yeah,
back then.
It's possible.
Yeah, especially in a small town.
Now the separation of everything,
Yeah.
And then I remember going to the center school and having Miss Phipps in the corner window on the left as you look at it, and Mr. Cole, and then that was a 6th grade teacher, and then we moved on to the new school where the old football field used to be. Okay.
Maybe because we haven't been making any
Okay.
motion in here, the lights went off and on. Okay, keep
Oh,
going.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah, right. Energy saving. And that's where the old stone throwers used to play back there, and that the white building that's in front of the shop of the middle school is, and down cellar was the dressing room of the stone throwers and the varsity football team. And one time, you check with Aubrey Doyle on this, but they used to play on Holt Street. The field used to be down there on Holt Street, not running north and south, but I'm quite sure it ran east and west, which is, against the rules today. Everything has to run north and south because of the sun factor.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Could you say a little bit more about the stone throwers for people
I-
that have no idea what they were?
Well, they were a semi-professional football team, and Charlie Hill was a big part of it. Charlie Hill was another guy that was very much involved with Hopkinton youth. He was on the Boosters Club along with Franny Adams when I first got there in '78. And he was on the team, and I don't know how they got that. Supposedly when they got beaten by somebody and the fans stoned the bus or the cars probably. I don't think they had buses back then. They had cars. They stoned the cars because they beat us, which they probably should have. and so with that, they became the stone throwers. It was all the newspapers named most of the town. I mean, the Hillers came from the newspapers because we lived up on a hill, and that's the only reason.
But the stone throwers were semi-pro
Yeah, they were semi-pro team.
That's great.
Yeah.
in Hopkinton.
All right, what else you got?
Well, you just touched a little bit on schooling. Anything else you can remember about either elementary school or when your years in the junior, senior high school? Maybe some things about classes, courses you had, how many kids were in your class. I know you recently had the class of '63 reunion. You must have come up with some good stories when you were together that weekend.
Our class was like 52 kids in it. So,
Okay,
and
Small.
But the classes in general, I see a picture of one, and maybe not, they were between 20 and 30, because this town was very frugal, and so you're gonna have 30 kids in a class because there weren't that many teachers, there wasn't that much money to go around, so they did a good job with Jack O'Brien being the superintendent and John Carey being the principal, and Marion Harris being the real principal and the real superintendent, because she really ran the show, and what a coach she was. Now, I don't remember her coaching in the 40s, but her girls' softball and basketball teams were undefeated year after year after year. Hopkinton girls outdid the guys at every stage of the game, and that's awesome. Yeah. But back to the center school, Miss Phipps, I can remember my sister bringing me to school because my mother was too busy having babies. My first day of school, I can remember it was down on the left in the lower level, and I was a mystery reader last year, and I explained to the kids that I used to live here and I used to go to school here, and we used to have gym class on the ramp going into the cafeteria because there was no other place. And then we got the one Ash Street, that big white building?
Yes.
That used to be a gym. And they used to have the basketball games in there, and there was a track on the upper part, which is not unusual. Newton had it. I remember when I used to teach in Watertown, there used to be a track around the basketball court there, not at the school, but at the Y or something like that.
Yeah.
And we used to play the games over there, and we used to eventually had gym class in there too, which was a lot of fun. Yeah, and we had Mr. Welch, the Chick Welch, is all the fields are named after. He was my gym teacher.
All right.
Yeah, and I remember once, dumb, but anyway, I'll tell you about it. We were playing kickball, and I remember kicking the ball, and we were playing however we picked up the teams. The other team was kind of really loaded with good players, Freddie Harris and all that. And Freddie Harris, knowing that they were going to win, somebody threw at the first base where Freddie was, and he was bouncing the ball like this, and Chick Welch goes safe, and we didn't know the rule because he didn't secure the ball, and so that's one of the few memories I have. But it's kind of cute. Then we moved on to the middle school. I don't remember much about it. I remember Mr. I forget his name, but he was a great teacher.
Did you? I know you were an athlete. Did you have middle school or junior high sports back then, or
No,
did you play?
No.
Could you play with the high school, or?
I didn't start playing sports till the 9th grade.
Okay.
Yeah. 4 years at Hopkinton, and then 4 years at Springfield.
Springfield College.
And then I coached for 11 years in Watertown as an assistant, going back to where my mother and father came from. That was kind of funny. And my aunt was still living there, and my cousins are still living there, and he married Hagman, and I taught my cousins, or step-cousins, whatever they are. That was kind of interesting. I used to teach history back then too. Yeah. It's like Eva Kiley, another great teacher at Hopkins. She used to always say, if you were a warm body, they'd throw you in there. And boy, she wasn't far off, believe me, because they didn't have the money, so you had to do what they told you to do, and you did it. And so.
And what year did you come to teach in Hopkinton? Was it teaching and coaching, or one or the other?
1978.
Okay.
I came, and we had Hopkinton football was in disarray in the 70s. Either lack of talent, lack of coaching, both, whatever. But I was Jerry Hart was coaching back then at R.B. Doyle, and they left me a pretty good team. I had Jimmy Adams, Kurt Svensson, and the Doyles came through, the Shaloskis came through, and we just rolled. We went from 2-8 to 7-3 and 7-3. I still got the plaque. They thought we won the Super Bowl at 7-3. And then we went 9-1, 9-1, 8-2.
And then you did win the Super Bowl in '93.
'93 we did. Yeah, that was fun. You remember that, huh?
Oh, yeah. So you must have played football for Hopkinton High School?
Oh, yeah,
did
definitely.
you?
I played.
Any recollections about that? Who else was on the
I
team?
just remember.
Who else you played? What it was like? How many kids on the team? And then maybe comparing that to when you were back coaching, how
Well, when
the town had changed.
Today, back then, we didn't have many kids, 16, 20 kids on the team. That included the JVs. And when I first got to Hopkinton, it was pretty much similar. There weren't that many kids. But we managed, and then today now, I mean, as at the end of my career, we were loaded. We had freshman teams, JV teams, varsity, of course. 60 to 80 kids on the team. And I played was like 16. One of my memorable memories, of course, in my senior year, I only played 2 games. I hurt my leg. The pads would move along, and I got ossificans, myofasciitis, ossificans. My muscle turned to a bone. And I remember going, and Dr. Joe would use his ultrasound on it. Ed Hayes, the coach, would have me get down there. Then he'd ship me down to Natick during the school day. I'd get down there and get a whirlpool, which was like, wow, what this whirlpool thing, huh? Well, Hopkinton didn't have a whirlpool. I was
Now
in
they
the
do.
water swirling around, just trying to increase the circulation, obviously.
Right.
And but the kids, Johnny Safram, Dickie Gooding, Freddie Harris, and Rolly Packard, and Jimmy Kurzankowski, they managed to go 4-4-1, which was very, very good. And upsetting Medfield they were undefeated, and we beat them 42 to, I'm going to say 12, but I'm not sure.
That's
Anyway,
a great win.
It was a great win. Yeah. And the only bad part about it is I didn't play.
Yeah.
I remember dressing for Ashland, thinking that he might sneak me in a play, and I just remember freezing on the sideline. But we did beat Ashland, and that was huge back then. Today we do it on a regular basis, but that'll switch too. That'll switch. Everything goes in the cycles, and Ashland's going to have their day, but they haven't had it for quite a while.
Right. Right. Well, and it's interesting for Hopkinton that some teams go up and down, yet as the town's gotten bigger and with more students to draw from, our teams in general have gotten really good. I remember when we first moved here, the football team was always good, but the rest of our teams never had winning records, and now you see a lot of them with winning records.
Yeah, I was lucky. Because I just had some good kids. And I know they could have played baseball and basketball too, but they were just football players.
Okay, yeah, more specialization. Well, you had a great athletic football career, both playing and coaching in Hopkinton, and I don't know how many people know, but you mentioned Brown Gymnasium and Chick Welch Field, and now we have the David Hughes Football Stadium.
Yeah.
So
I'm very honored by that, and it's like, I every once in a while, I'm afraid to look at it, to be honest with you. I look up every once in a while, I say, oh my God, that's supposed to be for people that have, memorial stadiums.
Right.
So I'm really thrilled and honored, and
yeah, it's
thank
a great,
that committee
legacy.
that did it.
Yeah. Anything else about high school, like what the kids did for fun, or the prom? Did you have the prom in the gymnasium? I know now they go to all sorts of fancy places.
We used to always have the prom. Of course, we were at the middle school now. You have to go back. That's the
Right.
Brown Gym.
It was a junior, senior high
Bliss has
school.
the floor now because of his great basketball records. And we used to decorate that with crepe paper. The janitors would, Bob Strait would hang the wires from end to end, and then we'd just drape the crepe paper over and hang it down. It was so much fun preparing for those proms, and I did it as a class advisor when I came back to Hopkinton. It was still fun, and to see the excitement in the kids' eyes, and then that night, and then it all, it just came to fruition. It was just one of the best things that ever happened in Hopkinton. Today they have the Grand March in the new gymnasium, and then they go off to a function hall to have their prom, but they have to because there's too many kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But back then, I bet you couldn't even tell it was a gym.
I'm
With the
sorry?
I bet you couldn't even tell it was
No,
a gymnasium
no,
with the
no,
decorations
God,
that they
no.
put up.
No, you couldn't. No.
Yeah.
You look at yearbook pictures, I'm sure I know there's prom pictures in there, and you would never know. You would never know.
Yeah. Anything else you can think of about in the respect to comparisons from the olden days to today concerning Hopkinton, maybe physically, downtown, how it's changed, or the fact that more people work outside of town? I mean, some of your friends when you were growing up, you mentioned many of them had farms, but I don't know if you remember what a lot of the other parents did if they worked locally as compared to today when so many people are out in Boston.
Well, let me start. Of course, we're a farm country today. Very few farms, if there's any. I know there's some, of course, Western nurseries.
Mm-hmm.
But we went from a two-seater, let me say, and as Mrs. Curtis from Woodville used to say,
your outhouse, right?
the privy,
Yes.
yes, the outhouse, to a 2.5 bedroom bath, 2.5 baths.
Yeah.
So that's a big comparison.
Yeah.
We had running water from the town back then, and there's a lot of people that did not. They had to pump it out of their wells, and today, of course, that wouldn't be heard of and shouldn't be because of the germs and all that, but
Yeah.
we grew up pretty healthy because we probably fought off all those germs at a young age, and and the diseases never caught up to us. And then of course the population growth. And back in my day, we did not have one single traffic light in Hopkinton, not even a blinker.
Mm.
And if you came out of Pleasant Street onto Grove, coming from Maine, coming up Pleasant Street, you did not have to stop. You just kind of merged because there was so few traffic. Traffic was so light.
Yeah.
But today, of course, and rightfully so, a stop sign. But the traffic in Hopkinton today, just coming down the hill from Northbridge, as you know, you're coming in from the same direction, is unbelievable. It's just unbelievable. I call it the Wellesley of the West. Because if you go driving Wellesley, all you have is traffic bumper to bumper. I don't care what time of the day it is. And we're getting there. And of course, with Legacy Farm being built, and I hear there's another subdivision is starting up or something like that. So with all that, more traffic. They're getting more light. They're getting a new light up there at the Angels, which is going to help the people coming out of School Street to get onto West Main and et cetera. But the biggest difference is the population, the traffic, of course the buildings, the houses, mansions, and it's a bedroom community versus a farm community.
Yeah. Anything you think that's similar though? You think of things that have still sort of stayed the same?
You know what the similar
Hopkinton?
thing is? The people. The people in Hopkinton still care for their kids. The kids is the driving force here. If you look at all the youth sports, and I'm involved with some youth football, and I see the volunteerism of the parents and their dedication to the kids. It's not only football, it's the soccer fields on Fruit Street, which I think are just awesome. That's incredible. The lacrosse development, the basketball development. They have that tournament up there on Thanksgiving. I mean, it goes for like 3 days, and I mean, it's like thousands. Seems like to me like there's 1,000 teams that come through there, all around Massachusetts, and that's the same. The people still care for their kids, and not just the parents. It's people like Ron Clark. You know what I'm saying? They still. The kids come first, and everything is for them to get better and better. I see that. It was like Paul Phipps and George Fargo. Same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Same thing. Aubrey Doyle. Same thing.
I agree, yeah, I think that's a great comment, that Hopkinton used to be a lot smaller, but it still has that small town feel.
Yeah,
It's
it really
grown,
does.
but,
Yeah.
but that character is still there. Okay, that's great, and I really do want to get to taking some snapshots of some of your documents. So I'm just going to say now this is the end of the October 31st, 2013 interview with David Hughes. The interviewer was Nancy Clark.